Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of history's most nightmarish places, a medieval battlefield hospital. Picture this. You're lying on blood-soaked straw, the air thick with the metallic tang of fresh wounds and the sweet rot smell of gangrene. Somewhere to your left, a soldier screams as a barber-surgeon saws through his leg bone. To your right, a monk mutters prayers over a dying knight while flies, thousands of them buzz in excited clouds over open wounds. You're clutching your own injury, maybe an arrow puncture or a sword gash, and you're starting to realize something terrifying. The battle might not be what kills you. It's what comes after. The so-called care you're about to receive in this medieval medical tent might actually seal your fate faster than any enemy blade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this community span the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just been carried off the battlefield on a wooden stretcher, your mail armor clanking with every jostling step your fellow soldiers take. The year is somewhere around 1346. And you've survived the initial clash of the Battle of Cresseberley. A French crossbow bolt punched through your thigh, and you've lost enough blood that the world keeps tilting sideways in nauseating waves. Your companions, exhausted and spattered with mud and worse things, haul you toward a collection of tense flying surgeons' flags, crude images of bleeding arms or amputated limbs that somehow pass for medical advertising in the 14th century. As you approach what passes for a hospital, the sensory assault hits you before you even arrive. The smell reaches you first. Imagine a butcher's shop that hasn't been cleaned in weeks, mixed with the outhouse behind a tavern, seasoned with burning flesh from cauterization irons. It's the kind of stench that coats the inside of your nostrils and makes your stomach clench. You can hear it too, a symphony of suffering that would make a modern emergency room seem peaceful. Men wail in agony, some calling for their mothers, others for God, a few just making wordless sounds that don't seem quite human anymore. The hospital itself is barely worthy of the name. It's a collection of large tents, maybe a commandeered barn if you're lucky, set up a few hundred yards from where the fighting raged. The idea is to be close enough to retrieve the wounded quickly, but far enough that stray arrows won't turn your surgeons into patients. In practice, this means you're in a muddy field that's rapidly transforming into a blood-soaked marsh as hundreds of wounded men leak out their life essence into the European soil. Your stretcher bearers, probably just regular soldiers pulled from the line because they looked strong, deposit you none too gently on a pile of straw near the tent's entrance. This is your waiting area, your chance to really take in the full horror of what you've gotten yourself into. The ground beneath the straw is sticky with blood, both fresh and old. Some of it has oxidized to a rusty brown. Some is still that bright arterial red that means someone's heart was pumping enthusiastically when it came out. Around you, dozens of other wounded men lie in various states of distress. The guy to your left is clutching his abdomen, trying to keep his intestines from spilling out through a sword wound, a losing battle. Judging by the gray pallor of his face and the way his hands are slowly going slack. To your right, a soldier with half his face caved in from a mace blow gurgles and twitches. You try not to look, but it's impossible to escape. This is your community now, your fellow sufferers in this medieval medical nightmare. The flies are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. They land on your wound with eager little feet, and you're too weak to properly swat them away. They're attracted to the buffet of exposed flesh, and they're not pick-a-theel sample your injury, then fly over to feast on someone's gangrenous stump, then maybe check out that pile of amputated limbs in the corner before coming back to you. It's a fantastic way to spread infection. Not that anyone here has the slightest understanding of germ theory. That won't be discovered for another 500 years. So for now, the flies are just considered annoying, not the tiny disease vectors they actually are. A figure emerges from the main tent, And you feel a surge of hope. Maybe this is your doctor, your salvation. He's wearing robes that might have been white once, back before they became a Jackson Pollock painting of various bodily fluids. He surveys the waiting wounded with the casual assessment of someone picking vegetables at a market. His eyes skip over you. Your wound isn't dramatic enough, apparently, and land on a knight in expensive armor who's bleeding from a head wound. Class distinction doesn't stop at the battlefield. It extends right into medical triage. The nobleman gets immediate attention while you, a common foot soldier, get to wait and leak. Historians still argue whether medieval battlefield medicine did more harm than good. But lying here in the blood and the flies and the screaming, you're starting to form your own opinion on the matter. The survival rates tell a grim story. Roughly 80% of soldiers who made it to these field hospitals didn't make it home alive. Those are worse odds than just staying on the battlefield and taking your chances with enemy swords. While you wait, you witness the full operation of this medieval medical theater. Assistants often just camp followers, prostitutes, or soldiers' wives scurry between patients carrying bowls of water that's more red than clear. They're reusing the same water, the same rags, dabbing at wounds with cloth that's been in contact with a dozen other men's infections. One woman wrings out a blood-soaked bandage and, instead of discarding it, dunks it in the murky water and wraps it around another soldier's arm stump. Waste not, want not, right? Who cares if you're essentially injecting the previous patient's potential infections directly into the next guy's open wound? The noise is relentless. Beyond the human suffering, there's the clang of metal instruments being tossed into buckets, the scrape of saws against bone, the sizzle when hot cauterization irons meet flesh. Someone's praying loudly in Latin, the words tumbling over each other in desperate speed. Another man is negotiating with a surgeon, apparently trying to bribe his way up the treatment queue with promises of money his family will pay. You wonder if it's working, if maybe you should try the same, but your coin purse was lost somewhere on the battlefield. Here's something that might surprise you. These battlefield hospitals weren't even the worst option for medical care in medieval times. That dubious honor goes to the siege hospitals, where wounded soldiers might lie trapped for months while their injuries festered. At least here, there's a chance you'll be treated within a day or two. At a siege, you might wait weeks, slowly rotting from the inside out while your doctors are too busy treating officers to even notice you're still alive. The medieval period, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, saw warfare become increasingly common and increasingly brutal. The 100 Years' War alone, which our fictional battlefield is part of, killed somewhere between 3 million people. And a huge percentage of those deaths didn't happen in the glory of battle. They happened in places like this, in the inglorious aftermath, where infection and shock and blood loss picked off the survivors like a second wave of attackers. You try to get comfortable, which is laughable given that you're lying on bloody straw with a crossbow bolt wound in your thigh. The straw is actually a quirky bit of medieval medical theory. In action, doctors believed that straw would absorb the bad airs and corrupt humors seeping from wounds. In reality, it's just providing a cozy breeding ground for bacteria and giving the rats something to burrow through when they come looking for snacks later tonight. A scream pierces through the general din, and you crane your neck to see its source. Through the tent opening, you glimpse a soldier strapped to a wooden table, his leg positioned over a bucket. A barber-surgeon, you can tell by his striped pole emblem and the fact that he looks like he'd be equally comfortable cutting hair or cutting off limbs, selecting a saw from an array of terrifying instruments. The patient is conscious, fully aware, and absolutely not ready for what's about to happen. Two burly assistants position themselves to hold him down. There's no anesthesia coming, no merciful unconsciousness, just pain, raw and absolute, until either the procedure ends or the patient passes out from the shock. This is your future. You realize this is what you're waiting for. The honor of being fully conscious while someone performs medieval surgery on you with tools that have been in and out of other people's bodies all day. Your wound isn't bad enough to kill you quickly, which means it's bad enough to require intervention, which means you're going to experience firsthand why so many soldiers chose to die quietly in corners rather than submit to treatment. But here's the thing about medieval battlefield hospitals that really drives home how different this world is from ours. The people running them genuinely believe they're helping. The monks praying over the dying truly think their interventions matter. The barber-surgeons sawing through bone actually believe their techniques are sound. The assistants reusing those filthy bandages have no concept that they're spreading death. Everyone here is operating on the best medical knowledge available to them, which just happens to be catastrophically wrong about almost everything. Your thigh throbs, and you look down to assess the damage. The crossbow bolt went clean through, which is actually lucky. It means there's no arrowhead lodged inside that will need to be dug out. But the wound is already showing signs of trouble. The edges are red and angry, starting to swell. A clear fluid weeps from the puncture, mixing with blood. In a modern hospital, this would get you antibiotics and careful monitoring. Here, it'll get you a poultice made of God knows what and a prayer to Saint Sebastian, patron saint of plague and pestilence victims. Time moves strangely when you're in pain and waiting. Has it been an hour? 3? The light filtering through the tent canvas suggests late afternoon, but you can't be sure. More wounded arrive in a steady stream. The battle is apparently still going strong. Or maybe these are men who've been lying in the field since morning, only now being collected. Each new arrival means you slip further back in the queue unless your condition worsens enough to become interesting to the medical staff. A rat scurries past your head, bold as brass, completely unfazed by the human suffering surrounding it. It stops to investigate a piece of something you don't want to identify, then continues on its way. The rats are almost as numerous as the flies, drawn by the scent of blood and exposed flesh. They'll get bolder as night falls, climbing onto wounded men too weak to resist, taking exploratory nibbles. Some soldiers will wake to find rats have chewed on their wounds. Some won't wake at all. You close your eyes, trying to escape the horror, but that just makes the sounds worse. Without visual input, your brain fixates on every scream, every wet squelch, every pleading prayer. You open them again, preferring the visual nightmare to the auditory one. At least with your eyes open, you can see threats coming, like that assistant headed your way with a bowl of something that looks like pond scum mixed with ground herbs. For the pain, she says, not unkindly, helping you sit up enough to drink. The concoction tastes like Satan's bathwater mixed with garden clippings. You gag, but she insists, and you're too weak to resist. It's probably a mixture of willow bark, which actually contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, some opium poppy derivative if you're lucky, and various herbs chosen more for tradition than efficacy. Will it help? Maybe slightly. Will it make you hallucinate? Possibly. Will it give you dysentery? Let's hope not, because you've got enough problems. As the questionable medicine slides down your throat, you look around at your fellow sufferers with new understanding. You're all in this together, waiting for treatment that might save you or might kill you faster than doing nothing. The medieval battlefield hospital, where the cure is often deadlier than the disease, where the helpers spread more infection than they prevent, and where your best hope of survival might be to quietly crawl away into the night and take your chances with herbs and prayer in some peasant's cottage instead. But you can't crawl anywhere. Your leg won't support you, and blood loss has left you weak as a kitten. So you wait, lying in the blood and the straw and the flies, while somewhere nearby a saw bites into bone and another soldier learns that medieval medicine is not for the faint of heart. Welcome to your new reality. Welcome to the medieval battlefield hospital. Try not to die before they get to you, though honestly, that might be the merciful option. The assistant who gave you that revolting pain medicine moves on to the next patient, and you're left to contemplate who exactly will be responsible for your fate when your turn finally comes. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be anyone with an MD after their name. In fact, the collection of individuals who pass for medical professionals in this medieval field hospital would make a modern licensing board weep into their clipboards. Let's start with the most qualified person you're likely to encounter, the barber surgeon. Yes, you read that right, the same guy who trims beards and cuts hair also moonlights as your trauma surgeon. This isn't some weird medieval joke. It's actual policy. See, back in your time, there's a massive divide between physicians and surgeons. Physicians are university-educated men who deal with internal medicine, diagnose diseases, and prescribe treatments. They're scholars, essentially, often trained in ancient texts and theories. They rarely touch patients directly because that would be beneath their dignity. Surgeons, on the other hand, are considered manual laborers, craftsmen rather than intellectuals. They're lumped in with barbers because both professions involve sharp blades and a steady hand. The Barbers Guild and the Surgeons Guild actually merged in many places, creating this hybrid profession that handles everything from shaving to amputations. Your barber surgeon learned his trade through apprenticeship, watching an older barber surgeon work, maybe reading a manual or two if he's literate, and practicing on whoever was desperate or unfortunate enough to need his services. The barber surgeon currently working his way through the wounded is a man named Jacques, at least that's what the assistants call him when they need more hot water or another saw. He's maybe 40, which makes him practically ancient by medieval standards, with hands that shake slightly from years of cheap wine consumption. Those same shaky hands will soon be rooting around inside your leg wound. Sweet dreams, right? Jacques learned his trade from his father, who learned it from his father, passing down techniques that are part legitimate medical knowledge, part superstition, and part educated guessing. Here's what Jacques knows: how to amputate limbs, his specialty, performed maybe 3 times a day during battle aftermath, how to cauterize wounds with hot irons, how to pull teeth, how to let blood, and how to apply various poultices and salves. Here's what Jacques doesn't know: literally anything about germs, the importance of sterilization, proper anatomy beyond the superficial, why infections happen, or how blood actually circulates through the body. William Harvey won't discover blood circulation until 1628, roughly 300 years from now. So Jacques thinks blood is produced by the liver and consumed by the body like fuel. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons deserve their terrible reputation or if they were actually reasonably competent given their limitations. Some evidence suggests skilled barber surgeons had surprisingly decent success rates with certain procedures. Others point out that decent in medieval terms meant maybe half your patients survived, which wouldn't exactly earn you privileges at a modern hospital. But Jacques isn't your only potential caregiver. Moving between the wounded with authority born of religious conviction is Brother Aldrich, a Benedictine monk whose medical training consists of reading a few translated Greek texts and a lot of prayer. The medieval church plays a huge role in healthcare, running most of the permanent hospitals and infirmaries, and monks are often the closest thing to educated medical practitioners available. Brother Aldrich can read Latin, which means he has access to works by Galen and Hippocrates, the ancient physicians whose ideas dominate medieval medicine. Unfortunately, Galen and Hippocrates were wrong about almost everything, despite being brilliant for their time. They believed in the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and thought that illness resulted from these humors being out of balance. Brother Aldrich will diagnose your wound infection as an excess of blood and heat, and he'll treat it by trying to cool you down and remove blood, which is exactly the opposite of what your shock-threatened, blood-depleted body needs. Brother Aldrich is earnest and kind. At least, he holds dying men's hands, whispers last rites with genuine compassion, and truly believes he's doing God's work. When he applies a poultice of bread mold to your wound, which accidentally might actually help since some molds produce antibiotic compounds, she does it with gentle efficiency and a murmured prayer. He's probably the best bet for bedside manner, even if his actual medical interventions are about as helpful as the flies. Then there's the truly terrifying prospect: being treated by one of the enthusiastic amateurs. The camp followers, a term that encompasses soldiers' wives, prostitutes, merchants, and various hangers-on who trail armies, often end up pressed into medical service during battles. There's simply not enough trained personnel to go around, so anyone with hands and a stomach strong enough to handle gore gets recruited. That woman who gave you the pain medicine, she's probably someone's wife or girlfriend, following the army to stay close to her man. Her medical training consists of watching a few procedures and maybe having some experience with childbirth or farm injuries from her previous life. She means well, but meaning well doesn't translate to knowing what she's doing. She'll pack wounds with whatever's available. Spiderwebs were popular because they seemed to help stop bleeding, which they actually did due to their antiseptic properties. Though nobody knew why. She might stuff your wound with moss, with chewed-up yarrow leaves, or with a paste made from boiled roots. It's medical roulette. Here's a quirky detail that might make you laugh if you weren't currently bleeding. Some of these camp followers are genuinely talented healers whose practical experience exceeds the theoretical knowledge of university physicians. There are records of army commanders specifically requesting certain women as medical staff because their survival rates were mysteriously better. These wise women carried knowledge passed down through generations, which herbs actually worked, how to set bones properly, when to leave wounds alone instead of interfering. But good luck figuring out which assistant has this valuable folk knowledge and which one is just making it up as she goes along. Another character in this medical drama is the wound licker. Yes, that's a real thing. And no, you don't want to think about it too hard. Some battlefield attendants specialized in cleaning wounds orally, using their tongues to remove debris and dead tissue. The theory was that saliva had healing properties. And honestly, they weren't completely wrong. Human saliva does contain healing compounds and enzymes, but it also contains bacteria. And when your wound licker has been cleaning a dozen previous patients, he's basically transferring infections from mouth to wound like a particularly disgusting relay race. You probably won't encounter a wound licker at this particular hospital. The practice is more common in some regions than others, but the fact that it exists anywhere tells you something about the state of medieval military medicine. People are trying everything, throwing every technique at the wall to see what sticks, because nobody really understands what they're doing. It's all trial and error, and you're the trial. Let's talk about the physician for a moment. Even though you're unlikely to see one, actual university-trained physicians rarely show up at battlefield hospitals. They're too valuable, too expensive, and frankly too snobby to deal with common soldiers. They reserve their services for nobles and the wealthy. If you were a knight or a lord, a physician might actually examine you from a distance. Of course, because directly touching patients is beneath them. He'd look at your urine, maybe take your pulse, consult some charts about planetary positions, because astrology is considered legitimate medical diagnostics, and prescribe some complicated remedy. But you're a foot soldier, so no physician for you. You get Jacques the barber-surgeon with his shaky hands, or Brother Aldrich with his humoral theories, or Margaret the camp follower with her mysterious poultices. You get the medieval medical B-team, and you'll be lucky if their interventions don't kill you faster than the original injury. The hierarchy here is fascinating in its own way. At the top are physicians who rarely appear. Below them are trained barber-surgeons like Jacques. Then come religious practitioners like Brother Aldrich. Below them are the experienced camp followers and wise women. At the bottom are completely untrained volunteers pressed into service out of necessity. And the really fun part? You have no idea who's going to treat you until they're already elbow deep in your wound. Jacques finishes with his current patient amputation that went about as well as could be expected. meaning the patient is still screaming, but at least he's alive, and wipes his hands on his already filthy apron. He doesn't wash them. Why would he? The miasma theory of disease holds that illness comes from bad air, not from contaminated hands or tools. So Jacques just gives his hands a cursory wipe and moves on to select his next patient. His eyes sweep the waiting wounded, and for a heart-stopping moment, you think he's looking at you. But no, he's focused on a soldier 3 spots down who's bleeding more dramatically. Triage in medieval times is less about medical urgency and more about spectacle. The guy who's screaming the loudest or bleeding the most impressively gets attention first, while you with your mere through-and-through crossbow wound get to wait. While you wait, you observe the assistants at work and start to understand the brutal efficiency of this operation. There's a bucket system-owned bucket for amputated limbs, one for bloody rags, one for instruments, one for waste. Unfortunately, the definitions of these categories are fluid. You watch an assistant pull a saw from the instrument bucket, use it on a patient, toss it in the waste bucket by mistake, then fish it out and put it back in the instrument bucket without even rinsing it. Cross-contamination isn't a concept that exists yet. Brother Aldrich approaches a dying soldier and begins administering last rites. The Latin words flow soothingly, and even though you can't understand them, there's something calming about the ritual. Medieval medicine might be largely useless, but medieval spiritual care has a certain dignity to it. The dying man seems comforted, his breathing easing as the monk's hand rests on his forehead. When the soldier takes his last breath, Brother Aldrich closes his eyes, makes the sign of the cross, and immediately moves to the next patient. There's no time for prolonged grief when dozens more need attention. Here's something that would shock a modern medical ethicist. There's no concept of informed consent here. Nobody's going to explain your treatment options, outline the risks, and ask you to sign off on a procedure. When your turn comes, Jacques or whoever is going to do whatever he thinks is best, and your job is to lie there and take it. If you're lucky, someone will explain what's happening while it's happening. More likely, you'll just feel a saw biting into bone and figure it out for yourself. The medical team's qualifications might be questionable, but their stamina is impressive. Jacques has been working for hours, performing procedure after procedure with barely a break. His apprentice teenage boy, who looks like he's about to vomit, shadows him, learning the trade through observation and occasional practice on patients who are either unconscious or too weak to object. This is medical education in the Middle Ages. Watch, copy, hope for the best. A commotion near the tent entrance announces the arrival of someone important. A knight in expensive armor is carried in on a proper stretcher, not just a wooden plank, and suddenly everyone's priorities shift. Jacques actually stops mid-procedure. His current patient can just wait with a half-sutured wound and hurries over to assess the nobleman. This is your medical team, competent within their severe limitations, but absolutely beholden to social hierarchy. Brother Aldrich, to his credit, doesn't immediately abandon his current patient, but you can see him glancing over at the knight, calculating when he can appropriately shift his attention to someone more important. Even spiritual care has a class system. The assistants bustle around the knight, bringing clean water, actual clean water from a sealed container, not the communal blood soup everyone else gets, and fresh bandages. You watch with a mixture of resentment and fascination. The care differentiation is so blatant it would be comical if it weren't literally a matter of life and death. Your wound throbs, reminding you that while you're busy observing the medieval medical hierarchy, you're also slowly bleeding and possibly developing an infection. The pain medicine has worn off, leaving you with crystal clear awareness of every sensation in your damaged leg. You can feel your heartbeat pulsing through the wound, each throb pushing out a little more blood. Marguerite Cheville decided that's the assistant's name, though you have no idea if your right passes by and notices you're conscious and alert. "Won't be long now," she says, which could mean 5 minutes or 5 hours in medieval medical time. She adjusts your position slightly, trying to make you more comfortable, and you're struck by the genuine kindness in the gesture. These people might not know what they're doing, but most of them are genuinely trying to help. Jacques finishes his preliminary examination of the night and issues orders to his apprentice. The boy scurries to gather supplies, and you notice they're getting the good instruments, the ones that look slightly less used, slightly sharper. The knight will get Jacques' full attention and best efforts, while you'll get whatever's left of his energy after he's done with the important patient. This is your medical team. A barber-surgeon with questionable training, a monk with his ancient texts and humoral theories, a collection of camp followers ranging from competent to clueless, and maybe a wound-licker if you're really unlucky. They'll determine your fate with their limited knowledge, their contaminated tools, and their class-based priorities. And the worst part? They're genuinely the best option available. The alternative is bleeding out on the battlefield or trying to self-treat in some ditch. So you wait, watching Jacques fuss over the night, watching Brother Aldrich murmur prayers, watching Margaret and the other assistants hurry between patients with their bowls of questionable remedies. These are the hands that will soon determine whether you live or die. These are the minds filled with misinformation, superstition, and the occasional flash of genuine insight that will guide your treatment. At least they're trying, you think, as another wave of pain washes through your leg. At least in this medieval nightmare, someone gives enough of a damn to attempt to help, even if their help might kill you. That's got to count for something, right? Your turn is finally approaching. You can tell because Jacques has finished with the night woes, been bandaged, medicated with what looked like actual opium, and moved to a private area of the tent and is now scanning the remaining wounded with the practiced eye of someone deciding which problem to tackle next. His gaze lands on you, and your stomach clenches. This is it. Time to discover exactly what's wrong with you according to medieval medical science. But before Jacques even touches your wound, before he examines your leg or asks about your symptoms, he needs to perform the most important diagnostic procedure in medieval medicine: urine analysis. And when I say analysis, I mean a comprehensive evaluation that would make a modern lab technician simultaneously laugh and gag. "Bring me the flask," Jacques calls to his apprentice, who produces a clear glass container that's seen better days. It's smudged with fingerprints and possibly remnants of the previous patient's sample. But nobody's worried about that. The apprentice holds it while Jacques directs you to, well, fill it. Privacy isn't really a concern. Harrier surrounded by dozens of wounded men, and modesty died somewhere around the time you realized you might lose your leg. You managed to produce a sample despite the awkward circumstances and your body's state of shock. The urine is darker than it should be, concentrated from blood loss and dehydration. Jacques holds the flask up to the light filtering through the tent canvas, and his examination begins. First, he studies the color with the intensity of a sommelier evaluating a rare wine. Medieval physicians have an entire color chart for urine. They call it a uroscopy wheel, with something like 20 different shades ranging from clear white to deep black, each supposedly indicating different conditions. Your dark amber sample makes Jacques frown. Too much yellow bile, he mutters. The humors are imbalanced. Here's where it gets really interesting, and by interesting, I mean disturbing. Jacques brings the flask closer and takes a deep sniff. He's smelling your urine to assess its qualities. Sweet-smelling urine might indicate diabetes. They called it honey urine back then and actually got that diagnosis right sometimes. Foul-smelling urine suggests infection or kidney problems. Your sample apparently smells appropriately martial, whatever that means, because Jacques nods to himself like he's confirmed something. But wait, we're not done. This is where medieval diagnostics takes a turn into territory that makes modern medical students dry heave. Jacques dips his finger into the flaskie's unwashed finger that's been in other patients' wounds all day and brings it to his lips. He's tasting your urine. He's actually tasting it. Historians still argue whether urine tasting was as common as the records suggest, or if it was more of a theoretical practice described in medical texts but rarely performed. But enough sources mention it and enough with specific details about sweet versus bitter versus salty that it clearly happened with some regularity. Lucky you, getting the authentic medieval experience. Jacques smacks his lips thoughtfully, like he's detecting notes of oak and berries in a fine wine. Bitter, he announces, with heat, definitely an excess of choler. For the record, choler is yellow bile, one of the 4 humors, and an excess supposedly causes fever and inflammation. He's not entirely wrong that you have inflammation. Your wound is definitely infected or heading that way, but his reasoning for how he knows this is absolutely bananas. The 4 humors theory dominates every aspect of medieval diagnosis. According to this ancient Greek concept, perfected by Galen and accepted as absolute truth for over 1,000 years, your body contains 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, choler, and black bile, melancholy. Each is associated with different qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, and with different organs. Health means these humors are in balance. Illness means they're out of whack. Jacques, having tasted your pee and determined you have too much yellow bile, now needs to figure out what caused this imbalance. He asks about your diet. What did you eat before the battle? Salted pork and hard bread. You tell him, which was the standard soldier's ration. He nods sagely. Too much heat in your food. Pork is hot and moist, but the salt makes it hot and dry, increasing the choler. This is complete nonsense, but he believes it absolutely. He checks your pulse next, but not the way a modern doctor would. Medieval pulse diagnosis is an art form involving multiple pulse points, different qualities of beats, and interpretations that vary wildly depending on which ancient text the practitioner learned from. Jacques presses his fingers to your wrist, then your neck, then your other wrist. He's feeling for strength, rhythm, and something called fullness, whether your blood vessels feel engorged or depleted. The pulse is weak and thready. He announces, well, yes, you've lost a lot of blood, so that tracks. But Jacques interprets this through his humoral lens. Weak pulse means deficient blood, which needs to be built back up. But it also means the yellow bile is dominating, which needs to be purged. Medieval medicine is full of these contradictions. Your treatment will try to do opposite things simultaneously. Now Jacques actually looks at your wound, and you'd think this would be the primary diagnostic method, but it's almost an afterthought compared to the urine analysis. He prods the swollen flesh around the crossbow puncture, and you bite back a scream. The skin is hot to the touch, reddened, with clear fluid weeping from the wound. Laudable pus is forming. Jacques says with satisfaction. Here's one of medieval medicine's most dangerous misconceptions. Laudable pus. They believed that thick, white pus in a wound was a good sign, laudable, meaning praiseworthy because it meant the body was purging evil humors. Clear or thin discharge was bad. It meant the wound wasn't healing properly. In reality, it's exactly backward. That clear fluid is serous drainage, which is normal. Thick white pus means bacterial infection. But Jacques is pleased to see your wound heading toward infection because he thinks it's healing. To encourage this laudable pus, Jacques will actually introduce irritants into your wound. Oils, poultices, sometimes deliberately dirty substances, all designed to promote suppuration. That's the medieval term for pus formation. They're going to intentionally infect you further because they think it's therapeutic. Sleep well with that knowledge. But we're not done with diagnostics yet. Brother Aldrich joins the examination, and he brings his own methods. He pulls out a small Buka medical manual copied from Arabic sources and begins consulting it. Medieval medicine borrowed heavily from Islamic scholars, who preserved and expanded on Greek medical knowledge while Europe was busy with its dark ages. This manual contains diagnostic charts based on everything from your zodiac sign to the current phase of the moon. When were you born? Brother Aldrich asks. You tell him late spring. You think, though you're not entirely sure because peasants don't exactly keep detailed birth records. He consults his charts. Gemini, an air sign, prone to imbalances of blood and phlegm, not choler. But Mars is ascendant now, bringing martial energy and heat. He's doing medical astrology, which is considered just as valid as urine testing. According to Brother Aldrich's calculations, the current planetary alignment is actually unfavorable for surgery. Mars ascendant might bring heat and aggression, but Saturn is in the house of death, which is apparently bad news for invasive procedures. He recommends waiting until the moon is waxing, which will be in 2 days. Jacques looks skeptical's more of a treat it now before it kills them kind of practitioner, but he doesn't dismiss the astrological concerns entirely. Here's a quirky detail that actually shows medieval medicine wasn't completely divorced from observation. They noticed that outcomes varied based on when procedures were performed. They attributed this to planetary influences, but the real reason was probably practical surgeries performed in daylight went better than those done by candlelight. Procedures done when the surgeon was fresh in the morning went better than those done after he'd been working for 12 hours. They saw the pattern but misunderstood the cause. Margaret, the assistant, offers her own diagnostic input. She examines your wound and declares that it has the evil eye upon it someone cursed you during the battle. This isn't official medical theory, but folk belief runs deep, and she's convinced. She wants to apply a charm, maybe spit on the wound 3 times while reciting a prayer, to counter the curse. Jacques waves her off impatiently, but you notice he doesn't completely dismiss the idea either. In medieval medicine, the line between science and superstition is more of a vague suggestion than a hard boundary. Your temperature is assessed by touch. Jacques places his hand on your forehead, your chest, your limbs. He's checking for imbalances of hot and cold. Your forehead is hot, which he already knew from the pulse and urine, confirming his excess choler diagnosis. But your hands are cold, which puzzles him. Cold extremities should indicate phlegm or black bile, the cold humors, not yellow bile. His diagnostic framework doesn't account for shock and poor circulation, so he's genuinely confused. A mixed condition, he finally declares, primarily choleric, but with some phlegmatic tendencies in the extremities. This is medieval medicine's escape hatch when the symptoms don't fit the theory. Just declare it a mixed condition. It's like a horoscope. Vague enough to seem applicable, specific enough to sound authoritative. Brother Aldrich suggests they examine your tongue. You stick it out, feeling ridiculous, while both men peer at it intently. The tongue's coating, color, and moisture all supposedly reveal information about your humors. Your tongue is pale anemia from blood loss with a white coating from dehydration. Jacques interprets this as excess phlegm trying to balance the excess choler. Brother Aldrich sees it as a sign that your vital heat is diminishing. They're both describing the same observation but through completely different theoretical frameworks. The examination continues with increasingly bizarre methods. Jacques checks your eyes, looking at the whites for yellowing, which could indicate liver problems. They got some things right by accident. He examines your fingernails for color and texture. He even asks about your dreams, because medieval medicine believes dreams reveal imbalances. Dreaming of fire means too much choler. Dreaming of water means too much phlegm. You don't remember your dreams. You've been too busy trying not to die, but Jacques seems disappointed, like you've withheld crucial diagnostic information. Here's something that might make you laugh through the pain. Medieval physicians believed that examining earwax could reveal health information. The color, consistency, and amount supposedly indicated various imbalances. You're spared this particular indignity because Jacques seems focused on your more obvious symptoms. But the fact that it's a legitimate diagnostic technique tells you everything about medieval medical logic. After consulting his charts, tasting your urine, checking your pulse 6 different ways, consulting the stars, and examining everything from your tongue to your toenails, Jacques reaches his diagnosis. You have a wound, brilliant deduction that's causing an imbalance of the humors, specifically an excess of yellow bile and heat, possibly complicated by corruption of the blood from the crossbow bolt's introduction of foreign matter into your body. The foreign matter part is actually somewhat accurate. The crossbow bolt did introduce dirt and fragments into your wound, but his understanding of why that's bad is completely wrong. He thinks the bolt brought in corrupt air and pestilential vapors, not bacteria. The treatment will focus on balancing humors and purging corrupted matter, not on cleaning the wound or preventing infection. Brother Aldrich adds his own diagnosis. Your soul is troubled by the violence of battle, and this spiritual corruption is manifesting physically. He's not entirely wrong that psychological trauma affects physical health, but his proposed solution prayer and perhaps a pilgrimage once you've recovered isn't going to address the infection brewing in your leg. Margaret whispers to you that what you really need is a poultice made from 7 herbs gathered under a full moon by a virgin. She knows a woman in the camp who has such a poultice. You don't point out that the moon isn't full and virgins are probably scarce in a military camp. You just nod weakly, because at this point, what's one more magical remedy in the mix? The diagnostic process has taken maybe 20 minutes, and you've been poked, prodded, tasted, indirectly, astrologically analyzed, and humorally categorized. The conclusion? You need bloodletting to reduce the excess choler, poultices to draw out corruption and encourage laudable pus, possible cauterization if the wound shows signs of cold gangrene, and extensive prayer. Not once has anyone mentioned cleaning the wound properly, removing all foreign material, or keeping it dry and protected from further contamination. These concepts don't exist in their medical framework. Instead, they're going to bleed you when you've already lost blood, intentionally promote infection, thinking it's healing, and possibly burn your flesh, which might accidentally help by destroying infected tissue, but for completely wrong reasons. Jacques makes notes in a small book, recording your symptoms and diagnosis for future reference. Medieval barber-surgeons are surprisingly diligent about record-keeping, though their records read like fever dreams to modern eyes. Patient with crossbow wound, urine of deep saffron hue, bitter to taste, pulse thready and irregular, Mars ascendant, recommended bloodletting of 8 ounces and application of drawing poultice. We'll begin treatment immediately, Jacques announces, and your stomach drops. You've just been diagnosed through methods involving astrology, urine tasting, and humoral theory. Now you're about to be treated based on that diagnosis. Remember that pain medicine from earlier? Yeah, it's definitely worn off. And based on what's coming next, you're really going to wish it hadn't. Jacques signals to his apprentice, and the boy begins assembling instruments on a wooden tray. You watch with growing dread as each tool is laid out. A wickedly curved knife, a bone saw with teeth that look like they've been sharpened maybe once in their entire existence, several cauterization irons already heating in a nearby brazier, and something that looks like a medieval torture device but is apparently just a specialized clamp. None of these instruments gleam with sterile cleanliness. Most are stained with dried blood from previous patients, and the saw has what looks like bone fragments stuck between its teeth. We'll start with the bloodletting, Jacques announces, as if this is supposed to comfort you. 8 ounces should rebalance the humors nicely. You want to point out that you've already lost plenty of blood. Thank you very much, but speaking requires energy you're rapidly running out of. Besides, arguing with medieval medical practice is like arguing with the weather, pointless and likely to leave you worse off than before. Brother Aldrich positions himself near your head, ready to offer spiritual comfort during the procedure. Margaret brings over leather straps, and you realize with creeping horror that they're going to tie you down. This is standard practice. Jacques explains in a tone that suggests he thinks he's being reassuring. Patients tend to thrash during treatment, and thrashing makes precision difficult. Better to immobilize you completely so they can work without interference. The straps go across your chest, your good leg, and your arms. They're tight enough that you can barely move, loose enough that you could probably still injure yourself if you really tried. Medieval restraint technology is all about practicality, not comfort. You're now fully at their mercy, unable to escape whatever they're about to do to you. Here's what you need to understand about medieval surgery. There is no anesthesia. None. Zero. The concept doesn't exist yet. Oh, they have substances that can dull pain: opium derivatives, alcohol, mandrake root preparations, but these are reserved for the wealthy or used sparingly because they're expensive and sometimes unreliable. You, a common foot soldier, get exactly nothing to separate your consciousness from the full sensory experience of having your body cut into. Well, that's not entirely true. Jacques offers you a soporific sponge, which sounds promising until you learn what it actually is. It's a sea sponge soaked in a mixture of opium, henbane, hemlock juice, and sometimes mandrake, then dried and stored. When needed, it's moistened with warm water and held under the patient's nose. The fumes are supposed to induce unconsciousness. The problem? The dosage is completely unpredictable. Too little and you remain painfully aware of everything. Too much and you stop breathing. There's no middle ground of pleasantly unconscious, just still screaming or dead. Jacques seems to recognize this because he looks at the sponge, looks at you, and decides against it. Your humors are too imbalanced, he says. The soporific might tip you toward death. So instead, you get the medieval pain management standard: a leather strap to bite down on and two burly assistants to hold you still. That's it. That's the entire anesthetic protocol. Jacques starts with the bloodletting, which he performs with a small, sharp blade called a phleem. He selects a vein in your arm, thankfully not the injured leg, and makes a quick incision. Your blood, dark and sluggish from dehydration and blood loss, begins flowing into a bowl. 8 ounces, he said. That's a full cup of blood he's about to remove from your already depleted system. The theory, remember, is that you have excess choler, which is hot and causes inflammation. Removing blood will cool you down and restore balance. The reality is that you're already in hypovolemic shock from battlefield blood loss, and removing more blood might actually kill you. But Jacques watches the bowl fill with the confidence of a man who absolutely believes in what he's doing. While your blood drips away, Jacques explains the next steps, presumably to distract you or maybe just because medieval surgeons like to narrate their work. He's going to debride your wound, remove dead tissue and foreign matter. Then he'll apply a cautery iron to stop any bleeding and seal the corrupt humors inside. Then comes a poultice designed to draw out badness and encourage that laudable pus he's so excited about. The crossbow bolt went clean through, Jacques observes, probing your wound with fingers that haven't been washed since this morning. That's fortunate. No arrowhead to dig out. I once spent 3 hours extracting a barbed point from a man's shoulder. He died the next day, but the extraction itself was quite successful. This is medieval surgery's version of a success story. The procedure went well, but the patient died. It doesn't occur to Jacques that maybe the 3 hours of rooting around in an open wound with dirty tools is what killed the man, not the original injury. Infection isn't a concept yet, so when patients die days after successful surgery, it's attributed to imbalanced humors or God's will, never to the treatment itself. The bloodletting bowl is nearly full. You're feeling lightheaded, and your vision is starting to narrow at the edges. Jacques seems satisfied. He pinches the vein closed and applies a bandage, the same bandage. You notice That was just used on the previous patient. He ties it tight, and the bleeding stops. Now for the wound itself, Jacques says, and your heart rate spikes despite your weakened state. This is it. The main event. The reason you've been dreading this moment since you first saw the field hospital. He starts by pouring wine over your wound. This actually isn't a terrible idea. Wine contains alcohol, which has antiseptic properties, but Jacques isn't doing it to kill germs. He's doing it because Hippocrates recommended it over 1,000 years ago, and tradition matters more than understanding. The wine burns like liquid fire, and you gasp against the leather strap in your mouth. The burly assistants press down on your shoulders, anticipating the real pain hasn't even started yet. Jacques takes a probia long, thin metal rod and begins exploring your wound. He's checking for damage to the bone, for foreign material, for signs of what he calls corruption. The probe slides into the puncture hole, and the sensation is indescribable. It's not exactly pain, though there's plenty of that. It's more like a fundamental wrongness. Your body screaming that there's a metal rod inside it where no metal rod should be. Bone is intact, Jacques announces, withdrawing the probe. But there's fabric deep in the tissue. The bolt drove your clothing into the wound. This is a common problem with penetrating injuries. The projectile doesn't just make a hole, it carries foreign material deep into the body. That fabric needs to come out, or it will guarantee infection. For once, Jacques is about to do something genuinely necessary, even if his reasoning is completely wrong. He selects a pair of forceps medieval tweezers, essentially, and goes fishing in your wound. The pain is extraordinary. You're fully conscious, fully aware, feeling every scrape of metal against your raw tissue. The leather strap in your mouth is the only thing preventing you from biting through your own tongue. You try to thrash, but the restraints hold firm. The assistants lean harder on your shoulders, pinning you completely. Almost. There. Jacques mutters, his tongue poking out in concentration. Finally, with a tug that makes you see stars, he extracts a piece of fabric. It's soaked in blood and other fluids, wadded up in the forceps like some grotesque prize. Got it. But he's not done. He probes again, searching for more foreign material. The crossbow bolt apparently brought quite a collection of debris into your leg. Each extraction is its own adventure in agony. You've stopped trying to hold still and are just enduring, existing from one second to the next, waiting for it to be over. Historians still argue whether medieval surgeons were unnecessarily brutal or actually quite skilled given their limitations. Some evidence suggests experienced surgeons could work with surprising speed and precision, minimizing suffering through efficiency. But Jacques isn't one of these legendary surgeons. He's a journeyman barber surgeon doing his best, which means this is taking a while, and every second is eternal. Finally, satisfied that he's removed all the foreign material he can find, Jacques moves to debridement. This means cutting away dead or damaged tissue, and it's about to get so much worse. He takes a small, curved knife and begins trimming the wound edges. The blade slices through tissue that's already traumatized and inflamed, and your body bucks against the restraints hard enough that one of the assistants stumbles. Hold him, Jacques barks, pausing in his work. I nearly cut an artery. The assistants readjust their grip, one of them practically lying across your chest now. You can smell his sweat, his breath, garlic and beer, and you focus on these details because focusing on what Jacques is doing with that knife would drive you mad. The debridement continues. Jacques is actually being fairly conservative, only removing tissue that's clearly dead or severely damaged. In theory, this is good surgical practice. In reality, the knife isn't particularly sharp, and the cutting is more like sawing. Each stroke sends fresh waves of pain through your leg, and you're making sounds you didn't know humans could make. The flesh is angry, Jacques observes, which is a vast understatement. Your wound is swollen, inflamed, and now actively bleeding from his interventions. We'll cauterize to seal it. Oh good, cauterization, because this wasn't fun enough yet. The cautery irons have been heating in the brazier this whole time, and they're now glowing red-hot. Jacques selects only flat iron about the size of his thumb and tests its heat by spitting on it. The saliva hisses and evaporates instantly. Perfect. Apparently, Brother Aldrich begins praying more fervently. He's seen this part before, knows what's coming. Margaret looks away. Even the assistants holding you down grimace. Jacques approaches with the iron, and you can feel the heat radiating from it before it even touches you. This will hurt, Jacques says, which might be the most honest thing a doctor has ever told a patient. But it's necessary to stop the bleeding and seal out corrupt air. The iron touches your flesh, and you understand why there's no description adequate for this sensation. This beyond pain, this transformative agony that rewrites your understanding of suffering. The sound is almost worse than the feeling the sizzle of your own tissue cooking, the smell of burning meat that you know is you. You scream into the leather strap, tears streaming down your face, your entire body rigid with shock. Jacques holds the iron there for what feels like an hour but is probably only a few seconds. When he pulls it away, there's a charred, blackened area on your wound. He examines it critically, decides it needs more, and applies the iron again. Different spot, same extraordinary pain. This happens 4 times. 4 separate applications of red-hot metal to your raw, open wound. By the 4th, you're barely conscious, shock and pain combining to create a kind of dissociative state where you're simultaneously experiencing everything and floating somewhere above your own body. Good, Jacques finally says, setting the iron aside. The bleeding is stopped, and the wound is sealed. Your leg looks like something from a horror story. The neat puncture wounds from the crossbow bolt have been transformed into a landscape of burned, swollen, oozing tissue. But the bleeding has indeed stopped. So from Jacques' perspective, the cauterization was successful. Now comes the poultice. Margaret brings over a bowl containing something that looks like moldy porridge mixed with grass clippings. Jacques explains, still in that educational tone, that this is a drawing poultice made from bread mold, honey, crushed camphor leaves, and ground spider webs. The bread mold and honey might accidentally help mold can produce antibiotic compounds. And honey has antimicrobial properties, but the overall mixture is a bacterial party waiting to happen. He packs this concoction directly into your wound, pressing it into the charred tissue, filling the puncture holes. The sensation is odd rather than painful after the cautery. Everything else feels mild. The poultice is warm, sticky, and smells like a swamp. This will draw out the corrupt humors and encourage laudable pus, Jacques says with satisfaction. In 2 days, we'll check for signs of proper suppuration. If the pus is white and thick, you're healing. If it's thin or foul-smelling, we may need to amputate. There it is, the word you've been dreading. Amputation, the medieval medical solution to infection, performed with the same lack of anesthesia you just experienced. Except it would last longer and hurt worse because they'd be sawing through your femur. Jacques wraps your leg in bandages that have definitely been used before. They're stained with old blood, and you watch a fly land on them just before they cover your wound. That fly was just crawling on that pile of amputated limbs in the corner. Now its bacteria-covered feet are being sealed against your open wound. Sweet dreams indeed. The restraints come off, and you collapse back onto the straw, utterly spent. You've survived medieval surgery, which puts you in a surprisingly exclusive club. Now you just have to survive the aftermath of the infection that's almost certainly coming, the fever, the possibility of amputation or death. Brother Aldrich leans close and whispers a blessing. His hand is cool on your forehead, and you're grateful for even this small comfort. Margaret offers you water, and you drink greedily, not caring that it's probably contaminated. Jacques wipes his tools on his apron and places them back in the bucket, ready for the next patient. He doesn't wash them, doesn't sterilize them, just sets them aside for reuse. Your blood, your tissue, your bacteria, all of it staying on those instruments, ready to infect whoever he treats next. Rest now, Jacques advises. Don't move the leg unnecessarily. We'll check on you tomorrow. And with that, he moves on to his next patient, leaving you to cope with what just happened. You're alive, you're still conscious, and you're beginning to understand that surviving the surgery might have been the easy part. The real challenge, surviving the recovery, is just beginning. You made it through surgery. Congratulations. Your reward? A front row seat to the wonderful world of medieval wound infection. Over the next few hours, as you lie on your pile of straw trying to process the trauma your body just endured, you start to notice changes. Not good changes. The kind of changes that make you wonder if maybe dying on the battlefield would have been the quicker, more merciful option. First comes the fever. It starts subtly, a warmth spreading through your body that might almost feel pleasant if you didn't recognize it as a danger sign. Your forehead grows hot to the touch. Sweat begins beading on your skin despite the cool evening air filtering through the tent. Within a few hours, you're alternating between feeling like you're burning alive and shivering so hard your teeth chatter. The fever is your body's response to infection, ramping up temperature to fight invaders. Trouble is, medieval doctors think the fever itself is the problem, not a symptom. Brother Aldrich checks on you as night falls and feels your forehead with concern. The fever burns hot. He murmurs, "Too much heat in the blood. We must cool you." This seems reasonable until you realize his solution involves applying cold, wet cloths to your body while you're already shivering. The humoral theory strikes again: fever means excess heat, so apply cold, regardless of what your actual body needs. The wet cloths do nothing except make you more miserable. Your body is trying to raise its temperature to fight infection, and they're actively working against it. But nobody understands this. They think they're treating the root cause when they're actually just making you more uncomfortable, while the real problem, bacterial infection brewing in your wound, goes completely unaddressed. By morning, your leg has transformed into something you barely recognize. The swelling has increased dramatically. Your thigh now roughly twice its normal size. The skin is stretched tight, shiny, and hot to the touch. The bandages Jacques applied yesterday are soaked through with fluid, not blood, but a yellowish discharge that smells faintly of rot. This is wound exudate, your body's fluid response to injury and infection, mixed with the beginning stages of pus formation. Jacques arrives for his morning rounds and unwraps your bandages with the enthusiasm of a child opening a present. He's excited to see how the wound is progressing, hoping for signs of that laudable pus he's so fond of. What he finds makes him nod with satisfaction. "Excellent," he declares, examining the oozing, swollen mess that used to be your leg. "The suppuration is beginning. See how the wound weeps? This is the body purging corrupt humors." You look down at your leg and see something from a nightmare. The cauterized areas have turned a disturbing shade of black-brown. The surrounding tissue is angry red and purple, and there are streaks, red lines radiating up your thigh from the wound site. Those streaks are lymphangitis, a sign that infection is spreading through your lymphatic system. They're literally a roadmap showing how the bacteria are traveling through your body. But Jacques sees them as heat lines, indicating the fever is trying to escape. Here's the thing about medieval understanding of infection. They know wounds can go bad. They've seen gangrene, sepsis, and death from infected wounds countless times. But they don't understand why it happens. Some think it's bad air miasma entering the wound. Others blame imbalanced humors. Some attribute it to God's punishment or demonic influence. The actual cause bacteria multiplying in damaged tissue won't be discovered for another 400 years. So instead of treating your infection with what it actually needs, antibiotics, proper wound cleaning, maybe surgical drainage, Jacques treats what he thinks is happening. He applies more poultices, these ones designed to draw out heat. They contain cooling herbs like mint and willow bark, mixed with egg whites and vinegar. He packs this onto your wound, and the vinegar burns like hellfire against the raw tissue. The heat must be drawn to the surface and released. Jacques explains while you bite back screams. If it stays trapped inside, it will corrupt the blood and cause death. He's not wrong about the death part, but his mechanism is completely backward. Still, you're in no position to argue. You lie there while he applies his useless remedies, each one either doing nothing or actively making things worse. Margaret brings you a drink, a tonic meant to fight fever. Contains willow bark, which actually does help because it contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. But it also contains ground beetles, mercury compounds, and something she calls mummy powder, which is literally ground up mummified flesh imported from Egypt at enormous expense. Medieval medicine occasionally stumbles onto things that work, but then ruins them by adding a dozen ingredients that range from useless to actively poisonous. You drink it anyway because thirst is overwhelming and you're not exactly in a position to be picky. Tastes like death, which seems appropriate given your current trajectory. By the second day, the infection has well and truly taken hold. Your fever spikes to levels that make you delirious. You drift in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of your surroundings, sometimes lost in fever dreams where the flies buzzing around your wound become demons, and Jacques' face looms over you like some medieval gargoyle. The wound itself has progressed from weeping to actively suppurating. Thick, creamy pus, laudable pus. Jacques was hoping for now oozes from the puncture sites. To a medieval doctor, this is a fantastic sign. It means the body is successfully purging corruption. In reality, it means your wound is absolutely teeming with bacteria, probably Staphylococcus and Streptococcus species, having a feast on your damaged tissue. Jacques is delighted. Perfect suppuration, he announces during his examination. White and thick, just as the ancient texts describe. The wound is healing magnificently. Your wound is not healing magnificently. Your wound is infected to a degree that would have a modern surgeon reaching for heavy-duty antibiotics and possibly considering surgical debridement. But Jacques sees exactly what his training has taught him to see. Laudable pus, which means healing, which means his treatment is working. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors were fools for believing in laudable pus or whether they were making the best of impossible circumstances. Some evidence suggests they knew, on some level, that pus could be dangerous. They distinguished between good pus and bad pus based on smell and color. But their fundamental misunderstanding of infection meant they often encouraged exactly what should have been prevented. The smell is what starts to really concern even the medieval practitioners. By day 3, your wound reeks. It's not just the normal smell of injured tissue, it's a sweet, rotting odor that makes people wrinkle their noses when they approach. This is the smell of necrotic tissue, of bacteria producing waste products, of your flesh literally decaying while you're still alive. Jacques sniffs the wound, his face showing concern for the first time. The odor is troubling, he admits. It suggests the presence of corrupt air trapped in the tissue. We may need to provide an escape route. An escape route, in medieval surgical terms, means cutting into your leg to allow the bad air to escape. It's called making a counter-opening, and it's exactly as terrible as it sounds. Jacques would make a new incision, possibly on the opposite side of your leg, to create drainage. In some cases, this accidentally helps by allowing pus to drain. In most cases, it just creates a second infected wound. Fortunately or unfortunately, Jacques decides to wait another day before resorting to counter-openings. Instead, he applies a new poulticetus, one containing turpentine, which actually has some antiseptic properties, mixed with honey and ground herbs. The turpentine burns viciously against your infected tissue, but the honey might actually do some good. Medieval medicine stumbling backward into effectiveness again. Your body is now in full-blown septic response. The infection in your leg has introduced bacteria into your bloodstream, and your immune system is going haywire trying to fight it. You're experiencing what would be diagnosed today as sepsis. Fever, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, confusion, and dropping blood pressure. Your organs are starting to struggle under the strain. But medieval doctors don't understand sepsis as a systemic condition. They see each symptom as a separate problem requiring separate treatment. Fever? Apply cooling remedies. Rapid heartbeat? You have excess blood, so more bloodletting. Confusion? Your brain humors are imbalanced. So here's a tonic that's mostly alcohol and opium. They're treating symptoms without any understanding of the underlying cause. Brother Aldrich spends more time at your bedside now, and his presence is no longer just spiritual comfort, it's preparation. He's seen this progression before, knows where it usually leads. He begins suggesting you make peace with God, confess your sins, prepare your soul. This is medieval hospice care. Get right with the Lord because your body is probably a lost cause. The other wounded men around you watch with morbid fascination. Your condition is a preview of their potential futures. Some have similar infections developing. Others are still in the early stages of treatment. One man, delirious with his own fever, calls out to you like your old friends. You don't recognize him, can barely process his words through the fog of illness. Margaret tries to keep you comfortable, which mostly means wiping your forehead with those useless cold cloths and helping you drink water. She's seen infections like this kill dozens of men. Sometimes she whispers prayers that blend Christian tradition with older, pagan practices, asking saints and older spirits alike to spare you. Probably doesn't help, but her genuine concern is touching. Here's a quirky detail about medieval wound care that shows they weren't completely clueless. They knew maggots could clean wounds. Some surgeons deliberately introduced fly larvae to eat dead tissue, a practice that's actually been revived in modern medicine as maggot therapy. But this knowledge wasn't universal, and Jacques doesn't employ it. Instead, he's horrified when he discovers maggots in your wound and picks them out carefully, removing the one thing that might actually help. By day 4, the red streaks have climbed higher up your thigh, approaching your groin. The lymph nodes in your groin are swollen and tender. You can feel them like painful lumps when you press on the area. These are your lymph nodes trying desperately to filter out the bacteria flooding your lymphatic system. They're overwhelmed, infected themselves now, adding to the bacterial load in your body. Jacques examines these swollen nodes with concern. In humoral theory, swellings indicate accumulation of corrupt humors that need to be released. His solution: lance them, cut into the swollen lymph nodes to let out the corrupt matter. This is potentially the worst idea yet. Your lymph nodes are infected but contained. Cutting into them would release bacteria directly into your system and create yet another wound to get infected. Fortunately, Jacques hesitates. The nodes are close to major blood vessels, and even medieval surgeons know that cutting the wrong thing in the groin can cause death through hemorrhage. Instead, he applies a drawing poultice directly to the swellings, hoping to bring them to a head so they'll drain on their own. This poultice contains something called oil of earthworms, literally earthworms boiled in oil, which was believed to have powerful drawing properties. It doesn't work, of course, but at least it doesn't make things actively worse. Your fever continues to spike and fall in cycles. When it spikes, you're burning up, throwing off blankets, sometimes hallucinating. When it falls, you shiver uncontrollably, teeth chattering so hard you fear they'll crack. This is rigors the body's response to bacteremia, bacteria in the bloodstream. Each fever spike represents another wave of bacteria being killed by your immune system and releasing their toxic contents into your blood. The wound itself has developed a hard, wooden feel around the edges. This is cellulitis progressing to something worse, possibly early necrotizing fasciitis, the flesh-eating infection. The tissue isn't just infected, it's dying. The infection is outpacing your body's ability to fight it, and dead tissue can't heal. Jacques finally admits that the wound is not progressing as he hoped. The corrupt humors are too deeply entrenched. He says gravely, "We must consider more aggressive intervention." In medieval surgical terms, more aggressive intervention means one thing: amputation. If the infection can't be controlled, remove the infected part before it kills the whole person. It's brutal, drastic, and often fatal in itself, but it's the only option they have for overwhelming infections. But here's the catch: your infection has already spread systemically. Bacteria are in your bloodstream, in your lymph nodes, probably seeding infections in other parts of your body. Amputating your leg won't save you now. It would just mean dying with one leg instead of two. Jacques doesn't know this, but some instinct, maybe experience. Maybe luck makes him hesitate. We'll wait one more day, he decides. Sometimes the body rallies unexpectedly. That night is the worst. Your fever peaks at levels that should probably kill you. You're completely delirious, aware only of pain and heat and a desperate, overwhelming thirst that no amount of water can satisfy. Your body is dehydrated from fever and from the purging remedies they've been giving you. Medieval doctors loved making patients vomit or develop diarrhea to purge corrupt humors. Not realizing this just made them more dehydrated. Margaret stays with you through the night, mopping your forehead, helping you drink, keeping the rats away. She's seen men die from wounds like yours more times than she can count. She's preparing herself for your death, probably planning what prayers to say, whether you have any belongings to return to family. But something strange happens. By morning, your fever begins to break. Not completely still feverish, but the desperate, deadly peak has passed. Your body, despite everything medieval medicine has done to hinder it, has managed to mount enough of an immune response to start controlling the infection. The bacteria are still there, still dangerous, but your immune system has rallied. Jacques examines you with surprise. The wound looks, if possible, even worse: more pus, more swelling, more discoloration. But you're more alert, able to speak in full sentences, no longer delirious. Your pulse is still rapid but steadier. The crisis has passed, at least for now. The body has purged the worst of the corruption. Jacques announces, taking full credit for your immune system's hard work. The poultices and bloodletting have restored balance. You may yet survive. You're too exhausted to argue, too grateful to be somewhat lucid again to question his interpretation. You've survived the peak of sepsis, which means you might actually make it. Maybe, if the infection doesn't come roaring back. If gangrene doesn't set in. If a dozen other medieval medical complications don't kill you first. Welcome to recovery in a medieval battlefield hospital, where surviving the infection is just the beginning of your problems. At least you still have your leg. For now. You've survived the worst of the infection barely, and now Jacques and Brother Aldrich turn their attention to your ongoing treatment. This is where medieval medicine really gets creative, pulling out remedies that range from accidentally effective to absolutely deranged. Your body might be starting to heal itself despite their interventions, but they're convinced their treatments are the reason, so they're doubling down. Jacques arrives with what he calls your recovery regimen, which sounds promising until he starts listing the components. First up, a tonic made from ground pearls, crushed emeralds, and gold leaf. Yes, actual gemstones and precious metals, ground into powder and mixed with wine. The theory is that precious materials have powerful healing properties. Their rarity and value must mean they're medicinally potent, right? It's magical thinking dressed up as medicine, and it costs more than you'd earn in a year of soldiering. Fortunately for your non-existent finances, you're not actually getting the gemstone version. That's reserved for nobles and knights. What you get is the poor man's substitute, a mixture containing ground eggshells, the pearls of the common folk, pulverized glass, which is basically sand, so not entirely stupid, just useless, and iron filings, the gold of your social class. You drink this concoction and feel the grit between your teeth, tiny particles that will work their way through your digestive system doing absolutely nothing therapeutic. Brother Aldrich contributes his own remedy, a potion blessed by the relics of Saint Sebastian. Sebastian, being the patron saint of plague victims and soldiers, is apparently your go-to spiritual medical specialist. The potion itself is water that's been poured over a piece of cloth, supposedly touched by the saint, or more likely, touched by something that was touched by something else that was maybe near something associated with the saint 6 transactions ago. This holy water with extra steps and dubious provenance. But wait, there's more. Margaret brings you something she swears by powdered mummy. No, seriously, actual ground-up Egyptian mummy, imported at enormous expense and supposedly possessing incredible healing properties. The logic is beautifully circular. Mummies have been preserved for thousands of years. Therefore, they must contain preservative properties. Therefore, consuming them will preserve your health. It's the medieval equivalent of eating bath salts because they're used for bathing. The mummy powder looks like brown dust and tastes worse than you can imagine, musty, chemical, with an undertone of something anciently wrong. You're essentially eating a person who died 3,000 years ago, ground up and shipped across the Mediterranean. The ancient Egyptians would be horrified to know their careful preservation efforts ended with their bodies being consumed as medicine by medieval Europeans. Here's a quirky historical detail. The demand for mummy powder was so high that suppliers started running out of actual ancient mummies. Their solution: make fake ones. They'd take recently deceased bodies, dry them out quickly, age them artificially, and sell them as genuine Egyptian mummies. So you might not even be eating an ancient pharaoh, you could be eating some poor Egyptian peasant who died last year and got turned into a medical supply. Somehow, this doesn't make it better. Jacques also prescribes theriac, which is supposed to be a universal cure-all. The original recipe, developed in ancient Rome, contained over 60 ingredients including opium, viper flesh, and various herbs. By your medieval period, theriac has become a catch-all term for any complex multi-ingredient remedy. The version Jacques gives you probably contains 20 or 30 components. Nobody's entirely sure which ones, mixed together in proportions based on tradition rather than any actual understanding of pharmacology. The theriac tastes like someone mixed every bitter herb in existence with honey and wine, then added some things that shouldn't be consumed by humans. You gag it down because refusing medicine in a medieval hospital isn't really an option. For all you know, some of those 60 ingredients might actually help. Opium would manage pain. Some herbs have genuine medicinal properties. And, the viper flesh is probably just vipers, contributing nothing but protein and psychological reassurance. Historians still argue whether theriac worked at all or was just an elaborate placebo. Some versions definitely contained opium, which would at least manage pain and maybe help you sleep. Others were probably just expensive placebos, complex and exotic enough to seem powerful, but medically inert. The fact that it remained popular for over 1,000 years suggests either it worked or people were really good at convincing themselves it worked. Then there's the wound care itself. Jacques removes the old poultice, a disgusting mess of pus, dead tissue, and whatever herbs he used and replaces it with something new. This one contains bread mold, which we've discussed. but also includes boiled earthworms, crushed snails, and something called dragon's blood, which is actually tree resin but sounds way more impressive. The earthworms are a whole thing in medieval medicine. They're considered cold and moist, perfect for countering hot, dry conditions like inflammation. So they're boiled in oil or wine, ground into paste, and applied to wounds. Do they help? Probably not directly, though the oil might provide some barrier protection. And earthworms do contain protein and enzymes. Mostly, they're just worms, and you're not thrilled about having worm paste on your open wound. The snails are even better. They're crushed alive shells and the resulting slime and shell mixture is applied directly to wounds. The theory is that snails are cold and moist, sensing a theme here? And their slime has healing properties. Interestingly, modern science has discovered that snail slime actually does contain compounds that promote healing and have antimicrobial properties. So this is one of those cases where medieval medicine accidentally got something right, even if for completely wrong reasons. The dragon's blood resin is actually one of the more sensible ingredients. It's a dark red resin from certain trees, and it has genuine antiseptic and wound healing properties. Cultures around the world discovered this independently, so it's not just medieval European superstition. Of course, Jacques thinks it works because dragons are powerful mythical creatures, not because of the resin's actual chemical properties, but at least it's probably helping. Your daily medication routine becomes a parade of increasingly bizarre substances. There's a drink made from boiled willow bark and chamomile, actually reasonable, since willow bark contains salicylic acid and chamomile is mildly anti-inflammatory. But then they add powdered hart's horn, deer antler, which contributes nothing except calcium and a sense that you're consuming something powerful and rare. There's a poultice made from pig's grease mixed with ground herbs. The pig fat actually makes sense as a barrier to keep the wound moist, and some of the herbs probably have mild antiseptic properties. But they've also added powdered bat wings because bats are creatures of the night and therefore must have power over dark humors. You're wearing bat wings on your wound. Let that sink in. Brother Aldrich insists on bleeding you again, not as much as before. Just a few ounces to maintain humoral balance during recovery. This is exactly what your anemic, weakened body doesn't need. But arguing with medieval medical practice is futile. You watch your blood drip into the bowl again, feeling weaker, while Brother Aldrich nods approvingly at the color and consistency. Margaret brings you a special soup that's supposed to build strength. Contains bone broth, which is actually excellent for recovery, full of minerals and easy to digest. But she's also added unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk powder, ground up and sold at astronomical prices to people who think unicorns are real, and something called bezoar stones, which are calcified masses found in animal intestines and believed to neutralize poisons. The soup tastes like bone broth with grit in it. The unicorn horn contributes nothing but calcium and keratin. The bezoar stones are literally intestinal stones, which do have some minor absorbent properties but nothing that justifies their legendary status. You're eating animal intestine stones because medieval medical theory says they're magical. This is your life now. Here's what's really happening. Beneath all the bizarre remedies, your body is healing itself. Your immune system, having survived the initial septic crisis, is now methodically fighting the infection. Your wound is slowly, very slowly beginning to close and form scar tissue. The fever is coming down. Your strength is gradually returning. None of this is because of the mummy powder or the bat wings or the unicorn horn. It's despite these things. Your body is doing what bodies have done for millions of years of evolution, healing from injury, fighting infection, recovering function. The medieval remedies are mostly just along for the ride, sometimes helping accidentally, often hindering, rarely making a significant difference. But try telling that to Jacques or Brother Aldrich. They see your improvement and credit their treatments. The theriac must be working. The bloodletting restored balance. The dragon's blood poultice drew out corruption. They're connecting correlation with causation in a way that would make a statistician weep. Some of the remedies are genuinely dangerous. There's a wound powder that Jacques considers usingit contains arsenic, mercury, and lead, mixed with herbs to draw out deep corruption. Arsenic is literally poison. Mercury is toxic. Lead causes brain damage. This is a recipe for killing you slowly while pretending to cure you. Fortunately, Jacques decides your wound isn't bad enough to warrant the strong medicine, which saves you from being poisoned by your own treatment. Then there's the recommendation to drink your own urine. Yes, really. Some medieval medical texts suggest that a patient's urine, having been filtered through their body, contains purified essences that can treat their own illnesses. It's called urine therapy, and it's exactly as disgusting and useless as it sounds. Jacques doesn't push this one hard, seems to recognize it's controversial even by medieval standards, but he mentions it as an option if you're not improving fast enough. You politely decline to drink your own pee. Thank you very much. You've got enough going on without adding that particular horror to your day. The pain management is its own adventure in medieval pharmacology. They give you drinks containing poppy extract opium, essentially which actually works for pain. But it's mixed with henbane, which is toxic and causes hallucinations, and mandrake, which is also toxic and also causes hallucinations. So your pain relief comes with a side of psychedelic experience and potential poisoning. The result is that you spend parts of your recovery in a strange, dreamy state where the pain is distant but you're not entirely sure what's real. The tent seems to breathe around you. The other wounded soldiers morph into strange creatures. Margaret's face becomes your mother's, then a stranger's, then something not quite human. It's terrifying and oddly peaceful at the same time. When you mention the hallucinations, Jacques nods knowingly. The medicine is working, he says. You're seeing the corrupt humors leaving your body, manifesting as visions before they dissipate. No, Jacques, that's not what's happening. What's happening is you're drugged out of your mind on a cocktail of opiates and toxic plants. But sure, let's call it humors manifesting. Your diet during recovery is carefully controlled according to humoral theory. You're considered to have excess heat and dryness from the fever and wound, so you need cooling, moistening foods. This means lots of boiled vegetables, watery porridge, and diluted wine. No meat, which is considered hot. No bread, which is dry. Nothing spiced. Nothing roasted. Nothing that might add heat to your system. The problem is that you actually need protein and calories to heal, and the cooling, moistening diet is mostly just weak soup. Your body is trying to rebuild damaged tissue, and it's being given gruel. Eventually, someone notices you're wasting away despite recovering from the infection, and they reluctantly add some boiled chicken, the coolest meat to your diet. There are also external treatments. They apply poultices to your chest and stomach, nowhere near the wound, because they believe your internal organs need support during recovery. These poultices contain mustard, which blisters your skin, and various herbs that smell strong and therefore must be powerful. You end up with painful red welts on your torso from the mustard burns, adding another layer of discomfort to your recovery. Brother Aldrich insists on cupping Gapling heated glass cups to your back to draw out corrupt humors. The cups create suction as they cool, pulling your skin up into painful bubbles. When removed, they leave perfect circular bruises. This is supposed to draw corruption to the surface, but really it's just giving you bruises. The suction might increase local blood flow slightly, but nothing that justifies the discomfort. By the end of your first week of recovery, you've consumed enough bizarre substances to stock a medieval pharmacy. Ground pearls, mummy powder, earthworms, snail slime, bat wings, unicorn horn, bezoar stones, opium, henbane, mandrake, Arsenic compounds, in small doses. Mercury solutions, also small doses, thankfully. And enough herbs to make you a walking botanical garden. Some of it helped, accidentally. The opium managed pain. The willow bark reduced fever and inflammation. The honey and certain herbs had mild antiseptic properties. The bone broth provided nutrition. Most of it did nothing. The gemstones, the mummy, the bat wings, the unicorn horn, all medieval magical thinking with zero therapeutic value. Some of it actively hurt. The bloodletting weakened you. The toxic compounds poisoned you slightly. The mustard plasters burned you. The restrictive diet starved you of needed nutrients. And through it all, your body healed. Not because of the treatments, not in spite of them, but parallel to them. Your immune system fought infection. Your tissues regenerated. Your strength slowly returned. You survived medieval medicine's best efforts to cure you, which sometimes felt suspiciously like trying to kill you. You're alive, recovering, and probably never want to see another ground-up earthworm for as long as you live. Welcome to medieval pharmacology, where the remedies are made up and the actual medicine barely matters. You're recovering, fever mostly down, wound slowly healing despite everything, and you might be forgiven for thinking the worst is over. That's when you notice something happening around you that makes your blood run cold. Jacques is choosing who gets treated and who gets left to die, and his criteria have nothing to do with medical need. Welcome to medieval battlefield triage, where your chances of receiving care depend less on how badly you're hurt and more on who your parents were, how much money you have, and whether you're wearing expensive armor. It's a system that would make a modern emergency room doctor quit medicine and become a hermit, but here it's just standard operating procedure. You've been watching this play out since you arrived, but now that you're more alert and less delirious, the full horror of it becomes clear. A nobleman with a relatively minor sword cut gets immediate attention. Fresh bandages, the good medicine, and Jacques' personal care. Meanwhile, 3 feet away, a peasant foot soldier with a sucking chest wound lies gasping for air, slowly drowning in his own blood, completely ignored because he's nobody important. The hierarchy is brutally explicit. At the top are knights and nobles, they get treated first. Always, regardless of injury severity. Next come men-at-arms, professional soldiers who serve noble houses. Then regular foot soldiers like yourself, but only if they're from wealthy families or can pay. At the very bottom are peasant conscripts, the men forced to fight by feudal obligation, who get treatment only after everyone else has been seen, if at all. Jacques doesn't even seem conflicted about this. It's not cruelty, it's just the natural order of things. A knight is worth 10 common soldiers. He explains to his apprentice during one of his teaching moments. We must allocate our limited resources wisely. Better to save 1 important man than waste time on 10 peasants. The math is coldly practical from a medieval perspective. A knight represents years of expensive training, valuable equipment, and social connections. His ransom value alone might feed a village for a year. Peasant represents, well, basically nothing. There are always more peasants. They're replaceable in a way nobles aren't. You watch a heart-wrenching scene unfold near the tent entrance. 2 wounded men arrive simultaneously, a knight with an arrow in his shoulder and a foot soldier with his leg nearly severed. The knight is in pain but stable. The soldier is dying, bleeding out, maybe minutes from death. Jacques doesn't hesitate. He goes to the knight. The apprentice, young and still possessed of some idealism, points out that the foot soldier needs immediate help or he'll die. Jacques barely glances over. Then he'll die. The knight must be treated. The foot soldier does die, right there on the blood-soaked straw, while Jacques carefully extracts an arrow from a nobleman who's going to be fine either way. Brother Aldrich tries to provide some spiritual equity. At least, he gives last rites to the dying peasant while Jacques works on the night. It's a small mercy. The poor man gets the same spiritual care as any noble. But spiritual equity doesn't stop the bleeding or keep you alive, so it's cold comfort at best. Here's where it gets even more disturbing. Within each social class, there's further hierarchy. Among the knights, those with higher rank get better care. Among foot soldiers, those who can pay get priority. There's an actual price list for medical services, and those who can't pay get whatever's left over after the paying patients have been seen. A wounded soldier near you tries to negotiate with Jacques, offering his armor and weapons as payment for priority treatment. The armor is cheap, the weapons worn, but it's all he has. Jacques considers, evaluates the goods worth, and agrees. The soldier gets treated within the hour. Another man, with a worse wound but no possessions to trade, waits all day and eventually dies of blood loss before anyone sees him. Margaret explains the system to you when she brings your evening medication. It's always been this way, she says, not defending it exactly, just stating a fact. The rich get the best of everything: food, shelter, medicine. Why should battlefield hospitals be different? Why indeed? In medieval society, inequality isn't a bug, it's a feature. The social hierarchy is considered divinely ordained, and disrupting it would be as unnatural as fish flying or birds swimming. From their perspective, treating a peasant before a noble wouldn't just be poor resource allocation. It would be defying God's plan. But the real cruelty isn't even the explicit hierarchy. It's the arbitrary decisions within it. Jacques has favorites among the nobles' knights he knows personally, soldiers from regions he likes, men who remind him of someone. These favorites get extra attention, better medicines, more careful treatment. Others, even of the same social rank, get standard care. There's one knight, Lord Edmund, heavily wounded with a belly wound that's almost certainly fatal, who gets extraordinary efforts. Jacques spends hours trying to save him, applying every technique he knows, using expensive medicines, monitoring him constantly. Edmund dies anyway because gut wounds in medieval times are essentially death sentences, but Jacques tried everything. Compare this to another knight, Sir William, whose family Jacques apparently dislikes. William has a similar belly wound and gets basic care at best. Jacques goes through the motions but doesn't waste the expensive medicines or his best efforts. William also dies, but much faster, with much less intervention. Same injury, same social rank, completely different care based on Jacques' personal feelings. Historians still argue whether medieval medical triage was pragmatic or cruel. Some point out that, with limited resources, saving those with the best chance of survival makes sense. And nobles often did have better baseline health from better nutrition. Others note that the system was fundamentally unjust, letting people die based on birth rather than need. Both things are probably true. The apprentice system makes triage even more disturbing. Jacques' young apprentice practices on the lower-class wounded. When he's learning a new technique, say, a different method of suturing, tries it out on peasants first. If it goes badly, well, it's just a peasant. Once he's comfortable with the technique, he can use it on nobles, where mistakes actually matter. You witness this firsthand when the apprentice attempts his first solo amputation. The patient is a peasant archer with a crushed hand. The boy is nervous, inexperienced, and makes several mistakes: poor positioning, hesitant cuts, imperfect cauterization. The patient screams and passes out from pain and shock. The apprentice eventually gets the hand off, but it's messy, traumatic, and takes 3 times longer than it should. Jacques observes critically, offering advice, treating it as a teaching moment. When the procedure is finally done, he nods approval. Good. You'll do better next time. Perhaps we'll have you attempt a leg amputation on one of the men-at-arms. The peasant archer has just suffered through a practice amputation, a training exercise, while a noble with the same injury would have gotten Jacques' experienced hands. The triage doesn't end with initial treatment either. Recovery resources are also allocated by rank. The knight has a private area of the tent, clean straw, dedicated attendants, and regular monitoring. You, as a foot soldier, share space with dozens of others, sleep on straw that's mostly blood at this point, and get checked on when someone remembers. The peasant wounded, if they survive initial treatment, are basically abandoned in a corner. They get fed if there's food left over. They get water if someone thinks of it. Their wounds are checked maybe once a day, maybe less. Infection, fever, gangrenesis develop unchecked because nobody's monitoring the peasant corner closely enough to notice. One man in that corner has been calling for help for hours. His wound has clearly gone bad. You can smell the gangrene from where you lie, and he needs immediate intervention. Nobody comes. Eventually, he stops calling. By morning, he's dead, and his body is hauled out with the other overnight casualties. He could have been saved, probably, with the same care the nobles get. Instead, he died alone and in agony because he was born poor. The social hierarchy even extends to pain management. Nobles get the opium-based remedies for pain. Common soldiers get maybe some willow bark tea if they're lucky. Peasants get told to pray and bear it. Your pain matters based on your social status, which is a special kind of cruelty. There's a twisted logic to some of it. Nobles are considered more sensitive, more refined, with more delicate constitutions that require careful management. Peasants are thought to be naturally hardier, more resistant to pain, able to endure what would kill a noble. It's classist nonsense, but it justifies giving the good medicine to the rich and telling the poor to tough it out. You watch Jacques treat a minor infection in a noble's finger with more care and attention than he gave to your life-threatening leg wound. The noble gets clean instruments, fresh bandages, gentle handling, and a detailed explanation of the treatment. Your initial treatment involved dirty tools, reused bandages, rough handling, and Jacques barely talking to you except to issue commands. The disparity in outcomes is stark and entirely predictable. Nobles, getting the best care available, have maybe a 50% survival rate for serious wounds. Common soldiers are down around 30%. Peasants? Maybe 20% if they're lucky, and that's including those who survive because their wounds were minor enough that even neglect couldn't kill them. Brother Aldrich provides what equity he can through spiritual care, but even that has limits. He has more time for noblemen's souls, conducting longer prayers, more elaborate last rites, ensuring their spiritual preparation for death is thorough. Common soldiers get a quicker version. Peasants might get a rushed blessing if someone remembers. Margaret and the other assistants try to be more equitable, but they're constrained by the system. If they spend too much time on a peasant patient, Jacques reprimands them for wasting resources. If they use good supplies on common soldiers, they're told they're being wasteful. The hierarchy is enforced at every level. Here's a quirky detail that reveals the absurdity of the system. There's a wounded peasant who turns out to be an excellent musician. One of the nobles hears him humming despite his injuries and demands he be kept alive to provide entertainment during recovery. Suddenly, this peasant who was left to die becomes valuable. He gets treatment, medicine, monitoring not because his life has inherent worth, but because a noble wants to be entertained. The musician survives, thrives even, and spends his recovery playing lute for the nobles section of the tent. His medical outcome is identical to what nobles get, simply because he possessed a skill someone powerful wanted. It's simultaneously heartwarming, a life saved, and sickening, the implication that without that skill, he'd be dead in a ditch somewhere. You're experiencing this hierarchy firsthand. Your survival so far is partly luck, partly timing, partly that your wound was dramatic enough to be interesting but not so severe as to be hopeless. But you're acutely aware that if a noble arrived needing Jacques' attention, you'd be set aside in an instant. Your life is conditionally valuable, dependent on there not being someone more important who needs help. The mental toll of this system is crushing. Lying here, recovering, you're surrounded by men who are dying not because their wounds are worse but because they're poor. You hear them calling for help that won't come. Watch them deteriorate from treatable conditions. See them carried out dead when they could have lived. And there's nothing you can do except be grateful you're not in the peasant corner. There's a man near you, a fellow foot soldier whose condition is worsening. He needs the kind of attention you got when your fever spiked. But he can't pay and he's not connected. So he waits. You watch him slip from bad to worse to critical. And still he waits. By the time Jacques gets to him, he's too far gone. The infection has won. Jacques spends 5 minutes confirming what's obvious and moves on. Could have been saved yesterday. Margaret whispers to you later. But there were nobles to tend to. She's not criticizing exactly, she wouldn't dare, just stating the obvious truth that everyone knows but nobody challenges. This is medieval battlefield triage, brutal, classist, efficient by the era's logic but monstrous by any humane standard. Your worth is measured not in injury severity or survival chance but in social status and ability to pay. The system saves some who should die and kills some who should live, all according to a hierarchy that values birth over need. And the worst part? Everyone accepts it. From Jacques making the decisions to the peasants dying from them. It's just how things are. This is your world, where your life's value is determined before you're born, and a battlefield hospital makes it horrifyingly explicit. Welcome to medieval medical ethics, where first, do no harm is less a principle and more a suggestion that only applies if you're rich enough to matter. You've made it through the worst of your initial treatment, survived the infection crisis, and endured the triage hierarchy. Congratulations, you're being moved to the recovery ward. This should be good news, a sign that you're expected to live. Instead, it's like being transferred from one circle of hell to a different, somehow equally terrible circle. The recovery ward is a separate tent, slightly removed from the main surgical area, where wounded men who aren't actively dying are sent to heal. In theory, this is a calmer, cleaner space where you can rest and regain strength. In practice, it's an overcrowded, disease-ridden nightmare where new threats await around every corner. They move you on a stretcher, and the journey may be 50 yards agonizing. Your leg, still healing, jostles with each step the bearers take. You grit your teeth and try not to cry out, but a few whimpers escape. The bearers don't notice or don't care. They're carrying maybe their 20th wounded man today, and your pain barely registers anymore. The recovery tent is larger than the surgical area but somehow feels more cramped. Men lie everywhere in cots if they're lucky, on straw pallets if they're not, directly on the ground if they're at the bottom of the social hierarchy. The smell hits you first. Unwashed bodies, infected wounds, excrement, and the particular sickly sweet odor of gangrene. You thought the surgical tent smelled bad? That was amateur hour compared to this. You're caught, and you do get a cot, which marks you as middle tier in the hierarchy's position between a man who's missing his right arm and another who has extensive burns from some battlefield fire. The burn victim's wounds weep constantly, soaking his bandages, and the smell is indescribable. The amputee seems relatively stable but keeps scratching at his stump, complaining about pain in the hand that's no longer there. Phantom limb pain, though of course nobody here has that term for it. The first thing you notice is the coughing. Everyone is coughing. Some have developed respiratory infections from the damp conditions and close quarters. Others are coughing up blood from wounds that affected their lungs. The sound is constant, a chorus of hacking and wheezing that never stops. Day or night, you're breathing the same air as dozens of sick men, inhaling their exhaled germs with every breath. Within 2 days, you develop a cough yourself. It starts as a tickle, progresses to a persistent irritation, and soon you're coughing hard enough to make your wounded leg throb with each spasm. Margaret brings you a syrup made from honey, horehound, and ground ivy. It tastes vile and helps marginally, mostly because the honey soothes your throat. But the cough persists because you're still breathing infected air in an enclosed space with inadequate ventilation. Then there's the dysentery. The dysentery, in the recovery ward, it spreads like wildfire through a dry forest. Contaminated water, unwashed hands, the single communal latrine trench, everything conspires to give you violent, cramping diarrhea. You first notice men making urgent, painful trips to the latrine area. Then you start seeing the bloody stools, the characteristic sign of dysentery. The latrine situation is its own special horror. There's a trench dug about 30 yards from the tent, and that's where everyone goes. If you can walk, you make the trip yourself, hobbling on your wounded leg, hoping you make it in time. If you can't walk, you use a bucket, which gets emptied. Eventually, the smell is beyond description, and the flies remember those flies from earlier? Have found paradise. They feast on the latrine, then come visit your wounds. It's a perfect disease transmission system. You catch dysentery on your 4th day in the recovery ward. It starts with cramping, progresses to urgent, watery diarrhea, and soon you're making painful trips to the latrine every hour. Each trip involves putting weight on your injured leg, which sets back your healing. The dehydration from dysentery makes your fever come back. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them, and medieval medicine's solution is to give you a binding remedy to stop the diarrhea. This remedy contains opium, which would actually help, mixed with chalk, crushed eggshells, and something called Armenian clay that's supposed to absorb the bad humors causing the flux. It sort of works. The opium slows your gut motility. The clay provides some bulk, but you're still infected, still losing fluids, still getting weaker. Historians still argue whether dysentery killed more medieval soldiers than battle wounds, but here in the recovery tent, you're beginning to think it's dysentery by a landslide. You watch men who survived horrific injuries, who fought off infection, who seemed to be healing, get absolutely destroyed by dysentery. Their bodies, already weakened from injury and blood loss, can't handle the additional insult. They waste away, dehydrated and delirious, dying from diarrhea after surviving sword wounds. The burn victim next to you develops dysentery while still dealing with his burns. He's too weak to make the latrine trips and soils himself repeatedly. The assistants change his bedding when they remember, but often he lies in his own waste for hours. The combination of burn wounds and fecal contamination is a recipe for massive infection. And within days, his burns are obviously infected, oozing pus and smelling of rot and excrement. At night, the recovery ward becomes even more nightmarish. The temperature drops, and the tent provides minimal protection from the cold. You're given a single thin blanket, which is woefully inadequate. You try to curl up for warmth, but this aggravates your wounded leg. Other men are shivering violently, their teeth chattering so loudly you can hear it across the tent. This is when the rats really come out. During the day, they're bold but somewhat cautious. At night, they own the place. They scurry between the cots, climb onto the weakest patients, and nibble at wounds. You wake up several times to the sensation of something crawling on you, and each time it's a rat investigating whether you're alive or dead enough to eat. One night, you wake to screaming. A man 3 cots down is being actively gnawed on by a rat that's decided his gangrenous foot is a meal. The man is too weak to effectively fight it off, just flailing weakly while the rat feeds. Eventually, someone throws something and drives the rat away, but the damage is done. The man's wound, already bad, is now contaminated with rat saliva and whatever diseases the creature carries. The blanket situation creates its own problems. There aren't enough to go around, so theft is rampant. Strong patients steal from weak ones. When someone dies, and people die nightly, there's often a scramble for their blanket before their body is even cold. You sleep clutching your blanket, one hand always on it, because losing it might mean freezing to death. Here's a quirky detail that shows how desperate things get. Some men have formed blanket alliances, sharing warmth by huddling together. It's practical but spreads disease even faster. You've been invited to join one of these clusters but declined, not wanting to share whatever infections your neighbors might have. Instead, you shiver alone, teeth chattering, wondering if pride is worth hypothermia. The food in the recovery ward would make you laugh if you had the energy. It's a thin gruel made from whatever grain is cheapest, sometimes with bits of meat floating in it that you can't identify. The gruel is served in communal bowls, the same bowls used by everyone, washed occasionally in the same water that's probably contaminated. You're essentially sharing saliva with dozens of sick men with every meal. Sometimes the meat in the gruel is visibly spoiled. You can see green patches, smell the rot, but you're starving, weakened from injury and illness, and you eat it anyway because the alternative is starvation. Your body, trying desperately to heal, needs protein and calories, even if they come from questionable sources. The water situation is equally grim. There's a barrel of drinking water, supposedly fresh, but you've seen the assistants refill it from a nearby stream downstream from the latrine area. You're drinking water contaminated with the waste of hundreds of wounded men. No wonder dysentery spreads like wildfire. Brother Aldrich tries to bless the water, thinking holy intervention might purify it. He makes the sign of the cross, mutters prayers, and assures everyone that God will protect them from harm in the blessed water. God, apparently, is not particularly concerned with waterborne pathogens, because people keep getting sick. The fellow patients are a mixed blessing. Some are supportive, offering encouragement, sharing what little they have. The amputee next to you, despite his own pain, sometimes helps you to the latrine when your leg is particularly bad. He's a decent man, a professional soldier who's seen multiple campaigns, and his gruff kindness is touching. But others are problems. There's a man who's clearly lost his mind. Trauma, infection, or fever has broken something in his brain, and he rants at all hours. He accuses other patients of stealing from him, of being demons in disguise, of plotting to kill him. Mostly, people ignore him, but sometimes his paranoia turns violent. He attacked an assistant once, convinced she was poisoning him. Now he's loosely restrained, tied to his cot at night, which makes him rant even more. Then there are the thieves. In the recovery ward, where everyone is desperate and supplies are limited, theft is constant. Your possessions, what little you have, must be guarded vigilantly. A man loses his boots and will likely lose his feet to frostbite when winter comes. Another loses his few coins, his only means of potentially buying better care. You sleep with your belongings literally under your body, the discomfort worth the security. The worst nights are when someone dies. It happens regularly: infection, dysentery, complications, or just giving up. When someone dies at night, their body stays until morning. There's no night crew to remove corpses, so the dead lie among the living until dawn. You've woken up to discover the man 2 cots down has been dead for hours, his body already stiffening, rats investigating his remains. The assistants do their best, but they're overwhelmed. Margaret might be responsible for 50 patients, with maybe 2 other women helping. They can't possibly provide adequate care to everyone, so they triage within the triage, focusing on those most likely to survive, those who can pay, those who complain the loudest. If you're quiet and poor, you might go days without anyone checking your wound. Your own wound care in the recovery ward is sporadic at best. Every few days, someone removes your bandage, applies a new poultice, and wraps you up again. But the bandages are reused. The poultices are made in batches and applied to multiple patients, and nobody's checking for signs of recurring infection very carefully. You're expected to heal or die largely on your own. The mental toll of the recovery ward might be worse than the physical. You're surrounded by suffering, constantly reminded of how bad things can get. The man across from you has gangrene creeping up his leg. You can see the black tissue, smell the death. He's gonna die or lose the leg, and everyone knows it, but medical intervention isn't coming quickly enough. He just lies there, watching his own body die piece by piece. There's no privacy, no dignity. When you need the latrine, everyone knows. When you cry out in pain, everyone hears. When you have nightmares, and you do, constantly everyone is awakened by your screams. You're reduced to your most basic, vulnerable state, and dozens of strangers witness all of it. The boredom is crushing too. You can't walk much, can't do anything productive. You just lie there, day after day, with nothing to do but think about your pain, your fears, your uncertain future. Some men play dice games with bones, literally animal bones serving as dice, but you don't have the energy or the stakes to join. Brother Aldrich makes rounds in the recovery ward, offering spiritual comfort and what medical help he can. He's a steady presence, one of the few sources of kindness in this place. He changes bandages, offers water, and listens to confessions from men who think they're dying. Sometimes they are dying, and his last rites are the only gentle thing in their final hours. The recovery ward is where you realize survival isn't just about overcoming your wound. It's about avoiding secondary infections, dysentery, pneumonia, rat bites, theft, hypothermia, starvation, contaminated water, and the mental breakdown that comes from being trapped in hell with no escape date. Your wound might heal, but any of a dozen other things could still kill you. And yet, somehow, people do survive. Men walk out of this tent, scarred and traumatized but alive. It's a testament to human resilience, to the body's desperate will to survive even in the worst conditions. You're determined to be one of them, to outlast the rats and the dysentery and the madness. But first, you have to make it through another night in the recovery ward, where the coughing never stops. The rats are bold, and death is always just a cot or two away. After weeks in the medieval medical nightmare, you're finally approaching the moment of truth. Will you actually make it out of here alive? Or will you become another body hauled out to the mass grave? Your chances, statistically speaking, are not great. Let's talk numbers. And they're not comforting. The overall survival rate for wounded soldiers who make it to medieval battlefield hospitals hovers around 20 to 30%. That means roughly 7 out of every 10 men who arrive here die. But that's the average, and your specific odds depend on multiple factors, all of which you're now acutely aware of as you assess your own situation. First, there's the type of injury. Penetrating wounds like yours, the crossbow bolt through the thigh, have maybe a 40% survival rate if they don't hit major arteries or bone. You lucked out there. The bolt went through muscle and soft tissue. Had it shattered your femur or nicked your femoral artery, you'd already be dead. So tentatively, you're in the better 40% for injury type. But then there's infection, which claims about 80% of wounded who survive the initial injury. You developed a serious infection, nearly died from sepsis, but your body somehow rallied. That's rare. Most men with infections like yours don't make it. The fact that you're alive means either you got lucky, your immune system is exceptional, or the few accidentally effective treatments Jacques applied actually helped. Probably all three. Dysentery has been your more recent enemy, and it's got about a 50-50 kill rate for wounded men. Healthy soldiers can usually survive dysentery. It's miserable, but not necessarily fatal. But wounded, weakened men? It's a coin flip. You survived, though you're 20 pounds lighter and weak as a kitten. Every day without bloody stools is a small victory. Jacques makes his rounds in the recovery ward, assessing who's ready to be discharged. Discharged is a generous term, really. It means who's unlikely to die in the next few days and can therefore free up space for new wounded. The standards aren't high. If you can walk, even badly, and you're not actively dying, you're eligible to leave. He examines your leg, unwrapping the bandages with hands that are, as usual, unwashed. The wound looks remarkably better than weeks ago. The swelling is mostly down. The angry redness has faded to pink, and miracle of miracles, it's actually closing. Scar tissue is forming, knitting the flesh back together in a puckered, ugly line that will mark you for life. Healing well, Jacques announces, sounding almost surprised. The humors have rebalanced. The corrupt matter has been expelled. You may live after all. You want to point out that your survival is despite his treatments, not because of them, but you're not suicidal. Instead, you nod gratefully, playing the role of the thankful patient who credits the barber-surgeon's skill rather than dumb luck and a strong immune system. But here's the grim reality. Even if you're discharged, your journey is far from over. You're in northern France, possibly hundreds of miles from home, with a leg that barely works and no resources. The hospital is releasing you because you're stable enough not to die immediately, not because you're actually healthy or safe. Brother Aldrich brings you the discharge papers, really just a scrap of parchment noting that you've been treated and released. This is important because without it, you might be accused of desertion if you're found away from your unit. The paper proves you were wounded, treated, and legitimately separated from your company. You'll need to find your unit, Brother Aldrich says, though both of you know that's unlikely. Your unit probably moved on weeks ago, either still fighting or marched to a different region. Finding them would require knowledge, resources, and mobility you don't have. More likely, you'll try to make your way home or attach yourself to some other group heading vaguely in the right direction. Margaret brings you what passes for discharge supplies. A small bundle of bandages, a tiny pot of salve, and a crust of bread. It's pitifully inadequate for a journey, but it's more than some get. She also slips you something else, a small pouch containing herbs she swears will prevent infection if you brew them into tea. Given medieval medicine's track record, you're skeptical, but you accept it gratefully. Her kindness has been one of the few bright spots in this nightmare. The amputee next to you is also being discharged. He's learned to walk with a crutch, his stump more or less healed, though it still weeps fluid occasionally. He's planning to try begging his way home, maybe join other wounded veterans on the roads. There's a whole subculture of wounded ex-soldiers. He tells you, men too damaged to fight but too poor to retire properly, traveling the roads and living on charity. Stick together? He suggests, and you agree. 2 wounded men might stand a better chance than one alone. Plus, he's got experience you lack. This is his 3rd campaign, his 2nd major wound. He knows how to survive on the margins of medieval society. Historians still argue whether medieval societies supported their wounded veterans adequately, and the answer seems to be, sometimes, if you're lucky. Some lords maintained their wounded soldiers, providing pensions or positions that didn't require full physical ability. Religious institutions sometimes took in wounded veterans as charity cases. But mostly, you were on your own, expected to figure it out or die trying. Before you leave, Jacques delivers a final warning. Keep the wound clean and dry. Change the bandages daily. If you see red streaks or smell rot, find a barber surgeon immediately. This is actually decent advice. Probably the best medical guidance you've received during your entire stay. Of course, finding a barber surgeon when you're on the road with no money is easier said than done, but at least he tried. Your final morning in the recovery ward is bittersweet. You're desperate to leave this place of suffering, but you're also terrified of what comes next. Here, despite everything, there's some structure, some care, some slim hope that if you get worse, someone might help. Out there, you're completely on your own. The burn victim next to you is still here, still suffering. His burns have partially healed but left him horribly scarred, and the infection that set in has cost him 2 fingers. He watches you prepare to leave with empty eyes, knowing he's got weeks more of this hell before he's stable enough to discharge. You feel guilty for leaving him behind, but there's nothing you can do. The crazy man, the one who rants about demons, is also still here, probably forever. He's too unstable to release, too mad to recover, but not sick enough to die quickly. He'll likely spend months in this recovery ward, slowly deteriorating until infection or despair finishes him. His family, if they even know where he is, probably can't afford to retrieve him. You gather your meager possessions, the clothes you were wounded in, now stiff with old blood and crudely patched, your discharge papers, Margaret's herb pouch, the bandages and salve. This is your entire worldly wealth after weeks of war and suffering. Everything else was lost or stolen. The walk out of the recovery ward is harder than you expected. Your leg, unused to bearing full weight for weeks, protests with every step. The scar tissue is tight, limiting your range of motion. You'll walk with a limp for the rest of your life, assuming you survive long enough to have a rest of your life. Outside the tent, the world is shockingly bright and loud. You've been in the dim, relatively quiet recovery ward so long that normal daylight and the sounds of the camp are overwhelming. Soldiers drill in the distance. Merchants hawk their wares. Life continues, indifferent to your suffering. The amputee, his name is Robert. You've learned joins you, and together you begin the slow journey away from the hospital. Every step is painful, but every step is also distance from that nightmare. So you push through. Here's a quirky detail that actually gives you some hope. Medieval society, for all its brutality, had a tradition of hospitality toward travelers. Monasteries, churches, and even some private homes offered food and shelter to those passing through. As wounded soldiers, you might qualify for this charity, especially if you time your appearances to look sufficiently pitiful. But the roads are also dangerous. Bandits prey on travelers, especially wounded, vulnerable ones like yourselves. Wild animals are a threat in forested areas. Other soldiers, from various armies, might see you as enemies or just easy targets. The journey home, wherever home is, will be its own kind of battlefield. Your chances of making it home are maybe 50-50 at best. Half of wounded soldiers who survive the hospital die on the journey, from infection, exposure, violence, or simple exhaustion. Your leg could get infected again. The dysentery could return. You could get robbed and left to die. A dozen things could still kill you, but you could also make it. Men do survive, do make it home, do rebuild lives after battlefield trauma. They become village elders with war stories, beggars with visible scars that elicit sympathy, farmers who work despite limps and missing fingers. Survival is possible, just not guaranteed. Robert has a plan, sort of. Head west toward the coast. Find a port town. Maybe work on the docks or beg from travelers. It's not much of a plan, but it's something. You've got no better ideas, so west it is. As you limp away from the hospital, you look back one last time. The tents still stand, flies still swarm, and wounded men still stream in from the latest skirmish. The medieval battlefield hospital continues its grim work, Saving a few, killing many, traumatizing all. You survived medieval medicine's best efforts to cure you, which sometimes felt indistinguishable from trying to kill you. You outlasted the barber-surgeon with his dirty tools, the monk with his humoral theories, the assistants with their recycled bandages. You survived infection, dysentery, rats, and the recovery ward from hell. Now comes the hardest part: surviving the journey home, building a life with a damaged body, living with the memories of what you endured. The physical scars will fade somewhat, though the limp is permanent. The psychological scars will last longer. Nightmares of the surgical tent, of screaming men, of the smell of infected flesh and burning cautery. But you're alive. Against odds that would make a statistician weep, you're alive. You walked into that medieval battlefield hospital with a crossbow wound and a slim chance of survival. You're walking out, damaged but breathing, which is more than 7 out of 10 patients can say. The road stretches ahead, uncertain and dangerous. Your leg throbs with each step. Your body is weak, your resources non-existent, your future unclear. But you're moving forward, away from the hospital, toward something that might be home. That's victory, medieval style. Not glory, not triumph, just survival. Just making it through another day, another mile, another challenge. Just refusing to die despite everything trying to kill you. You limp westward, Robert beside you, 2 wounded soldiers against the world. The odds are still against you. The journey will be brutal. But you've already survived what most don't, so maybe just maybe you'll make it home after all. And if you do, you'll have one hell of a story about why you wouldn't last a day in a medieval battlefield hospital. Except you did last. Somehow, against all odds and medieval medicine's best efforts. You survived. Now you just have to keep surviving. The sun dips lower as you and Robert shuffle along the rutted road. Each step a small negotiation with pain. Your leg protests. His stump aches where the crutch rubs. But you keep moving because stopping feels like surrender. Behind you, the hospital fades into the landscape. Just another collection of tents in a war-torn countryside that's seen 1,000 such camps. The evening air grows cool, gentle against your skin after weeks in the stuffy, fetid recovery ward. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that doesn't smell of gangrene and dysentery. It's strange how something as simple as clean air can feel like luxury, like blessing, like hope. Robert points to a copse of trees ahead. We'll rest there, he says, his voice soft, tired. You nod, conserving energy for the walk. The trees will provide shelter, some protection from the wind that's picking up. Tomorrow you'll walk again, and the day after, and the day after that, until you reach somewhere that might be home. Your leg will always carry the scar, that puckered reminder of a crossbow bolt and everything that followed. But scars are just stories written on skin, proof that you survived what tried to destroy you. In the fading light, with each painful step taking you further from nightmare and closer to possibility. That feels like enough. The medieval battlefield hospital taught you something valuable, though the lesson came at terrible cost. The human body's will to survive is extraordinary, capable of overcoming infections, fever, medieval medicine, and circumstances that should absolutely be fatal. You carry that knowledge now, along with your scars and your limp and your memories. Sleep will come easier tonight, under stars instead of tent canvas, without the sounds of suffering that filled every moment in the recovery ward. Tomorrow brings its own challenges, its own pain, its own uncertainties. But tonight, you're alive, you're free, and you're moving toward home. That's enough. For now, that's everything. Rest well, survivor. You've earned it.